Hey guys, welcome to the MoneyfitMD show. If you're listening on the podcast or YouTube, I'm so glad you found me. Listen up. I am so excited because you're about to enjoy a real treat. And if you know me, I don't hyper exaggerate things. I literally mean that you're here for a treat. And because I have the pleasure of having a guest with me that we've been trying to schedule this date forever. Those people that are inside of our money school, they know her because she's come there a couple of times to guest and just share her wealth of knowledge. In fact, the organization she works for was one of the sponsors for our in-person event, and we're going to talk a lot about that. And this was Wealthy You Live that happened in Atlanta. And I wanted her to come talk, but we couldn't because she was getting her GI business on, which I was really proud of because y'all know I'm a GI doctor. I'm all for that. But I'm so excited that she gets to just add a lot of value to you guys today. So without further ado, I want to say welcome, Whitney, on our podcast today.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. And thank you for pushing me to get my GI business done. So, yes.
Listen, y'all, I can talk about money all day, but you got to get that GI stuff because at the end of the day, our health is just so important. But all of that to say that we're going to talk about some good stuff here, especially when it comes to passive income and generational wealth. So this is one episode that you may want to listen to a couple of times because I know it's going to add so much value to you. For those that are here, that are watching us, can you just give us an introduction about who you are and your journey specifically as it comes to your investment and your career in general?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you where I'm at today. I'm the Director of Investor Education at PassiveInvesting.com. We do multifamily self-storage, express car washes, and real estate debt. I also am the founder of Ash Wealth, so I coach investors, how to scale their passive real estate portfolio, their private investment portfolio. And whether you already have one scaled or like you're just like in the very beginning, you want to scale it like the right way. That is what I do there. But I didn't start off like that. I don't have a real estate degree. I don't have a finance degree. I actually kicked it off in 2002 when I bought a house with a significant other and became an accidental landlord because a month later, the relationship fell apart and here I had a house. And I had to figure out how to rehab this house. I mean, it had green shag carpet, psychedelic daisies painted all over the walls. And YouTube didn't exist back then, or if it did, I didn't have it. Anyway, so I went to the Home Depot, got a Home Depot 1, 2, 3 construction book and taught myself how to do everything, paid my friends and roommates and beer, sushi, and pizza. And we got that thing rehabbed and I sold it 11 months later, which is quite frankly my number one investing mistake. Like I should have held on to that piece of real estate, but it allowed me to scale from there. And I was like, ooh, this is the first time that I've actually created value in the world that was unhooked from the time that it took for me to create it. And mind you, so I'm not a MD, I'm a PhD in nutrition. I also have a master's in epidemiology. At the time, I was working for the CDC. Remember, 2002, right after 9/11. And I was doing all the smallpox vaccination training for Colorado and Wyoming. And also teaching, doctors and public health nurses how to identify smallpox, anthrax, different chemical, biological, and radiological events. It was kind of a stressful job. It had me traveling about 80 hours a week. And so when I rehabbed this house, and don't get me wrong, I love my job. But when I rehabbed this house, I'm like, oh, that's what's going to get me to financial independence and financial freedom. It's not going to be working in public health. And seeing clients on the side. That's not what's going to get me there. It's going to be scaling this. And I didn't have to have a degree to do it. So I went on, did several more live and flips and house hacks, individually, and then met my husband, did some together. And then a friend of ours one day, was like, we were struggling to figure out how to retire off this income because it comes like every few months, but not regularly. And they were like, well, why don't you put a renter in one of the properties instead of selling it? And I was like, that's genius. So then we started, renting out the properties. And then eventually our market in Colorado didn't make sense from a rental perspective. So we started buying properties out of state, scaled up to just right under 40 units. And then decided, I'm like, I think it'd be easier if we had an apartment building as opposed to 40 single family homes, because I'm running myself ragged. Mind you, I'm still working. By this time I'm in community public health. I'm working, in retail chain pharmacy, helping scale, pharmacy chain. And I was like, wow, we need to figure out, my side hustle is crushing my soul. I love it, but I got to figure out a different way. So we started getting into larger and larger pieces of real estate actively, and then eventually passively, because I needed to figure out, again, how to unhook my identity, my time, to how much money I could create. And when I realized that I could invest in a project passively and still get a cut of the deal and get cash flow, get equity, get tax benefits, and somebody else was, I was creating leverage, right? I'm leveraging their time, knowledge, and expertise in order to get this. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And so where I'm at today, I'm over 6,500. I have over 800 million in real estate as a GP. I don't even know like how much passively, but we have over 6,500 residential units, 2,200 self-storage units, partners in 15 express car washes. I used to say I had a camper van rental business, but we just recently sold that this summer, so out of that one. But yeah, and a partridge in the pear tree too. So, a lot of different things. But what has given me the most time freedom, choice freedom, freedom to create impact in the world has been our passive portfolio.
Okay. So lots of great stuff in that introduction. And I'm going to have you define some terms for us, for those that may be watching and maybe they're new to investing or they're just scrolling on YouTube or on podcasts and they see this episode. So you mentioned active investing versus passive investing. Can you tell us in brief what the difference between those two things are?
Yeah, so there's two different definitions. One definition a lot of people like hanging on to, especially in the real estate world, is the tax definition. What's going to get taxed as active income versus passive income? But really, when we're trying to create wealth for ourselves, that's fine. The tax perspective is fine. But we want to, I really focus on the time perspective. How much time am I actually the one that is creating the strategy, finding the deal, underwriting the deal, closing on the deal, managing the deal, like dispositioning the deal, selling it, refinancing, whatever that might be, and then having to replace that capital again. The more of those functions I take, the more I'm on the degree of active involvement I am in. So if you're buying single family rentals and you're managing them yourself, you're doing all of that. If you place them with property management, now you started ticking back your active activity, but you're still active. When you start investing in other people's deals, you're still a little active because you need to create your strategy. You need to find the operator. You need to find the market. You need to understand the deal. But then you've removed a lot of those day-to-day active activities. You're not doing the underwriting, the acquisitions, the lending, getting other investors, so you've taken a lot of those activities off the table. So it's a sliding scale. When you look at all those functions it takes to close a piece of real estate and manage it on a day-to-day basis and then disposition it, how many of those can you outsource, right? Like I love teaching people, you need to be the CEO of your financial portfolio. And you need to go partner with good COOs that are going to manage the acquisitions, the management, and the disposition. Because quite frankly, you have a higher and better time, better use of your time. Even if you're trying to get out of your day job, I don't know how many people here are trying to, no longer be an MD or maybe choose their hours, or like just, like you travel a lot and, engage in, medicine whenever, you're called to do it. And so that's what I love, working with people to kind of help figure out.
I love how you have that as a spectrum because one of the misconceptions and I think miseducation is where people talk about active and passive as if they're like stakes in the ground. But I like the spectrum where you describe it so that they're looking more of like their time, how much of their time. Because even when we look at our real estate investment, we have, short-term rental, we have long-term rental, we have long-term rental that we're managing ourselves. We have long-term rental that is being managed by property management. So there is a spectrum to the level of activity or passivity. I'm going to bite my tongue. Right. So I like that. And so the other term that I want you to help us define, because I think it relates to this, is when you talked about being a GP. What does GP mean for those that are listening and have never heard that term before? And is there a spectrum as, LP or whatever relative to the other definitions you may break down for us?
Yeah. So GP, general partner, and thank you for calling that out. The general partners in a passive deal. So, okay, when you have a passive deal, say like, we're going to buy an apartment building together. You're going to be the limited partner. Okay. I'm going to be the general partner. You're going to be passive. I'm going to be active. Okay. And we're kind of dividing the money up that way. But for a stake in the deal, I'm going to go find it. I'm going to underwrite it. I'm going to perform all the due diligence. I'm going to do day-to-day management. I'm going to get it, across the finish line, as far as the business plan and even disposition it. For me being that active role, okay, I'm going to take a cut. You as the passive investor, you're bringing the money. So I'm bringing the time and the hustle and the expertise. You're bringing the money. Okay. But what do you get back? Your time. And you get a cut of the money as well. And so the general partner is generally active. The limited partner is passive. And they have to remain passive. Their involvement once they write the check should be extremely limited. And that is for legal reasons, Securities and Exchange Commission, thank you. We can dive down that rabbit hole all day long. But even on the general partner side, there's a sliding scale there, right? Because I can take all those functions, and the more of those functions that I'm taking on as a general partner, probably the more I'm going to get paid. And the less of those functions that I'm taking on, the less I'm going to get paid, right? Now, there is a clear definition with the Securities and Exchange Commission that somebody cannot be just a capital raiser, meaning they can't just bring money to a deal. If they are, they have to be a broker dealer in order to get a slice of that compensation. Okay, there's some like weird things in here. We might be overcomplicating it a little bit, but so in order to kind of, play above board, if somebody is bringing money to a deal, they now, as a general partner, have to take some sort of active role. So now they have to participate in asset management or work with the accountant, work with the legal team. So they have to take another active role out of that pie if all those positions were a pie.
I love the way you broke that down. And yes, the making sure that you are compliant and the people that may be doing this are compliant is really, really important. So, and we're not going to go into details about the tax consequences, but that also, if you're a general partner, there's some tax privileges you may have compared to someone that has like a limited partnership. So that's why the government doesn't want you to benefit from a tax perspective, but not actually do the work that you said you're going to do. So those are more legal things that maybe we'll talk about on future visits. But for this episode, I like the extent to which we're having this conversation. So I want to go back to your story because, you have a PhD in nutrition. I love my nutritionists. We work really well together. It's like, it's great. But one thing that I want you to help us answer is, if you have a PhD in nutrition, that also means you're maybe not a lot of money. That's the truth about it, right? Unless you have other entrepreneurial skills and you know how to actually make money. But when you bought your first investment, there was an amount of money that you put into it. And then I know you talked about scaling, but were you using outside money to grow? Or was it mostly internal money that you were making from the deals was what you were reinvesting? Because there are people that are listening to me that, yes, maybe they're physicians, but they're like, I don't have a lot of money to start from. But now you're going from like accidental landlord, you're talking about millions of dollars that you're part of. So helping people make that bridge with their brain, help us with that a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So the first thing, time is your best friend. Okay. So what are those things that we can do on a repetitive basis? And this is where a lot of people fall short. I mean, you get most of the people here that are doctors, you've got somebody that comes into your office and they have a complaint and you're just like, wow, if you just ate more fiber, if we're talking about GI, if you just ate like 25 to 45 grams of fiber every single day for the next year, your GI will probably be like really good. How many people actually take that to heart and do that on a daily basis? Drink water, right? It's doing the boring stuff in a repetitive fashion. So if we're, how did I do it? And then how can anybody do it? How did I do it? I had saved up a lot of money. And I shouldn't say a lot. I had saved up $8,000 to be exact. And then I borrowed.
That must have been a lot of money for you then.
It was. And that took me years to do. I think I started saving money when I was like 16. I didn't know what for. 9 years later, I was buying a house with it. The fact that I only had $8,000 like 9 years later, especially when I didn't pay for any of my college, like, whoa, we won't go into that story. But anyways, so I took that $8,000. I borrowed some money from my grandfather, and I was essentially like 103% financed on this property. I had a first and a second. Paid everybody off. And then when I sold the property, I made $52,000 because I forced the value on the property. I took it from green shag carpets, psychedelic daisies painted on the walls, walls in the wrong places, and made it beautiful to where the next person was going to pay more for it. Okay. So I forced the value. I brought value to that project. And I did. I walked away with a $52,000 check. Not only that, I hadn't been paying for any of my expenses. My roommates who were living in a construction zone paid for the principal, interest, taxes, insurance, all the utilities on the property. So I was saving money every month. So I actually—
And that's because we were paying rent? They were
paying
rent.
Rent. Okay. Yeah. So actually, like when it was all said and done, I walked away with probably like, a total of like $65,000, largely tax free, because I was able to take advantage of the 121 exclusion, which is like the 1031 exchange, but for regular people, those of us who aren't investors, right? Like we can sell a property every 2 years and keep that money tax free if we hit certain guidelines, right? Anyways, and then I took that in my next project and I doubled it there, and then I doubled it again, and then I doubled it again. And then I started taking smaller bets on multiple projects. So I started creating scale. So you start getting hockey stick growth. It's like going flat, 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 flat. And then all of a sudden starts curving, right? Probably hit that hockey stick growth at about 2015, 16, 17. So how does somebody start creating that hockey stick growth for themselves? Again, time is the biggest player here. Setting step number one, and I have a lot of this outlined in my book, Money for Tomorrow, but I'll just pull out the pieces where most people kind of trip up and don't serve themselves. Track your income and your expenses. I have yet to work with an investor that actually does the skill accurately month in and month out. It's like I coach soccer, okay? And how do you open up every practice? Well, you get a little warm up, okay? You run around the field, make sure the legs are working, and then we pass the ball. We dribble the ball. We juggle the ball. And those are the basic skills. And if I can teach somebody those basic skills and they can master those skills, now I can start stacking on all the cool strategies on top. What do most investors want? They want to learn the cool strategies without having the basics mastered. They want to start investing, but they're like, I don't know how to get the next 15, 20, 50, $100,000 to place the next investment. We got to start with tracking income and expenses. Then we also have to track the overall portfolio. Okay. Now somebody might be like snoozing and like tuning out, like falling asleep. Okay. But this is the part that's going to get you to financial freedom, because now when we have clarity on where we truly are at with our income and expenses, where we truly are at with our assets and our liabilities, we can now make moves. I can start teaching you how to reduce your expenses according to your values. That way you don't feel constricted, right? I think Dave Ramsey, Susie Orman would tell us, hey, it's as simple as cutting your grocery bill in half, cutting your cable, and not shopping. And it's not, because what I value is different from what you value. If you saw what my family, if my computer were turned around, you would see a line of mountain bikes and like cruisers. What we spend on like outdoor gear and mountain bikes, somebody would just like roll over. But what I see, what people spend on like dining out, which is no value to me, I would like have the same like guttural response. So I teach people, how do we reduce our expenses and keep it aligned with what our values are? Okay. This shouldn't be about deprivation, but about delayed gratification. Okay. And then we need to talk about all the different ways to keep money. All right. And the ways to keep money are going to be like, how can you leverage interest wisely? Okay. You can either pay interest or get paid interest. And there's a whole formula around how to figure out like which credit cards to pay off first. I was going through with a client the other day, and we were reorganizing our finance, actually two, and both of them were trying to pay off one of their rental houses first. And I'm like, but you got a credit card with $10,000 on it. And if you paid that right now, you would get a 40% return on your money. Whereas you're only getting an 8% return on your money by paying down this home that probably you shouldn't be paying off, right? So we talk about the different ways how to leverage debt appropriately. Then it's about how can we reduce all the fees in our life, because fees are just erosive. They're in pretty much every transaction that you have. It's money that's going to somebody else that you're never going to get back. But the problem is you're going to have it, but how can we capture as much money as possible? If you're not doing large transactions, real estate transactions, your fees are going to be lower. But if you're investing, say like in an IRA or a 401k, you're going to have fees in your portfolio that are going to rob you of hundreds of thousands of dollars compounded over 30 or 40 years, right? So we talk about how to, leverage that. And then taxes, how do we like not pay taxes? But that's like an icing on the cake. But those are some basic moves, one to kind of help us create money, leverage what we're doing already effectively and efficiently. Then we figure out how to keep it, which is a rule of the game. You got to create, you got to keep money. Then once we have those two puzzle pieces in place, now we can actually start taking everything that we're creating and we've optimized, everything that we're keeping. And now instead of just saving $200, $400 a month, you could probably save $1,000, $3,000, $4,000. That down payment for your next investment comes a lot sooner. Then we get to pillar number 3, rule number 3. How do we win the investing game? Rule number 3, like how do we grow it?
I love that. And I think the mistake that many people make is they see their current circumstance and try to look into the future, and they cannot see how to make the gap, right? They're like, well, I'm earning this money. Maybe it's like I'm earning multiple 6 figures and I don't have a lot left. How am I supposed to invest? So I like the way that you broke that down. And I definitely want you to let us know, because I'm excited about the grain in your background. I want you to make sure you let us know where we can get your book from, and we'll make sure there's a link as well so that people can go buy this. It's available on Amazon. It's something that is very, very important that every human should literally know about money. And I want us to talk about how to now grow that money, especially from a passive, quote unquote, perspective, what you have done with yours, what you teach people to do, and maybe some of the common mistakes that people make when it comes to choosing how to now grow the money that they've now worked to keep.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the book Money for Tomorrow, How to Build and Protect Generational Wealth, you can get it on Amazon or Bigger Pockets. If you get it on biggerpockets.com, you'll get 3 or 4 videos along with it that'll help you digest the contents of the book. Because some people are like audio driven, visually driven. But that's really the whole end-to-end game plan to get you like 85, 90% of the way there, right? And really what I do is I defined what multi-generational wealth is from a game perspective. And if you're learning any game, you have to know the objective, then you have to understand the rules. And the rules are create wealth, keep wealth, grow it, pass it on. Investors, you asked about a mistake, they focus on creating and investing, and they don't think that keeping applies to them or like passing on applies to them for whatever reason. Like nobody likes talking about death, right? So they have weaknesses there. And we'll go into more of those in a second. And then once you understand the objective, the rules, now we can start layering on strategies. But again, it's like learning anything. I mean, nobody here went from opening up your medical textbook to performing surgery. Like you had to perform the basics. You had layers of learning on top of it. Money is no different. Okay. The cool thing is you guys are super smart. And I love working with physicians because you guys are super smart, action oriented. And you're like, next. And that mostly is a strength. So let's talk about investing. What do you need to do in order to grow your wealth? Well, there's a myriad of things. I think I'll give a framework for how people should look at all of their investments, how they can optimize, and then I'll go into like some of the core mistakes that I see investors make, especially from a passive investing perspective. So what can you do right? One is learn how to actually evaluate a passive investment. Okay, and the passive investment. When you look at your questions, your due diligence checklist, whatever you're using to evaluate a passive investment, I want you to take that checklist tonight or set a time on your calendar, and I want you to reorganize it into 7 categories. And those categories should be, how does it preserve my capital? How does it create cash flow? How does it build equity for me? How does it, give me tax benefits, if any, right? How does it use leverage? Is it using leverage wisely? Is it an inflation hedging asset? Meaning, I'm going to be able to lock in a loan and let the devaluation of the dollar create wealth for me? Or is there a way that this asset, that operationally I can increase the income as my expenses increase? Okay, so meaning like as the markets change, I can actually change the valuation of the asset. And then lastly, the expert. How am I evaluating the expert that's running this deal? Now, if you're active, guess what? You're the expert. You better be the expert. But passive, you need to get really good at performing due diligence on operators. And so that moves me, and we can dive down any of those 7 rabbit holes, what I call the pillars of wealth, but that moves me into where investors mostly make a mistake. They make mistakes in, a couple of key areas. One, they never define their own goals, the risk, and the timeline. They borrow from somebody else. I like your investment strategy, so tell me how you did it, and I'm going to copy it. Like we might be generationally apart, and we might have totally different needs. You need, equity growth. I need cash flow, right? Like that's going to change everything else downstream. So you have to understand your own goals, the risks that you are willing to take, not what other people are willing to take, and then the timeline, your time horizon. And the thing is, your time horizon, is always going to be changing. And so we have to, what your investment strategy is today in 2024 is going to be different than what it is in 2029 and into 2035, right? So we're going to be, we're going to be looking at these things constantly over time. That's why we need to have the skills. Okay. We can't just partner with an investment advisor and they put together a plan for us one time and we call it a day. No, we can't do that. So that's number one. Investors, I see they don't spend time to sit and think here and really work through that. Their goals, their risk, and timeline. And then the next thing is they don't think of, from a passive perspective, Creating an investor thesis. Because creating an investor thesis, essentially like, what is my roadmap for how I invest? What do I want? Also, what is going to keep me up at night? And I'm going to outline all those decisions on a piece of paper right now. That way, when an investment's in front of me, I can actually check it off really fast and be like, oh, okay, great. This meets my thesis. Whereas what I see a lot of investors do is they keep it in their head. They're like, oh yeah, totally. I know like what's going to keep me up at night. Don't worry. I don't need to write it down. They keep it in their head and they get an investment in front of them and that dopamine starts pumping and they get excited and they'll talk themselves into any deal being a good deal. Okay. So those two pieces kind of go part and parcel together. And then, the other part, the big part that I see investors not do, especially on the passive side, in the usual suspects, did you vet the operator correctly? Did you vet the deal correctly? I think a lot of people talk about those things, but not tracking their portfolio. We've circled back to the beginning of the conversation, tracking that portfolio correctly to understand what went right, what do we need to continue doing, what do we need to start doing, what do we need to stop doing, how are you going to make adjustments in the process?
Those are so detailed and so helpful. And I love that you included vetting the sponsors. Like, I would even bring that as like number one to the very top because, right, everyone is going to talk about what could go right with a deal, but what could go wrong with the deal? And even when the same circumstance happens to two people, how one person would respond to it is so different with how the other person is going to respond to it. So how do they respond when has deals gone north? If they've told you, like, is it north or south, whatever, gone north.
I guess it depends on which hemisphere you're in, right? Like
exactly, right? But that is so important because I've heard people, that maybe deals have gone bad and the owners of the deal kind of like just disappeared, right? With no information, with no communication. And I'm curious to hear, have you had people share experiences with you? And maybe what are some things you could share is if deals go wrong, or how do you repair a relationship that is not going in the right direction, especially as a passive investor in a deal?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I will say, a lot of what investors are currently nervous about in the environment today in 2024 is to how do I understand an operator that, how did their investments fare over the past 2 or 3 years? And am I going to get myself in the same situation? Here's kind of the cool thing about investing passively in 2024, kind of post this interest rate run up, a lot of this volatility we've seen in the real estate market. If you got all your systems in place, you're going to ask those questions of the operators. A lot of the operators that are still standing, the ones that have poofed, they're gone, right? There are still operators that there are challenges, right? It's not to say that things can't, materially change in the business, but I think, investors today are even in a better position to have visibility into how did a project go? How did you handle it? Like, what adjustments did you make? Like, how's your portfolio doing today? And so I think it's actually easier to vet an operator today than it was like even 2 years ago. So I think people should hear that and really just make sure that you've shored up your investor thesis, you have your due diligence checklist in place, and that you're actually using the checklist, right? We go back to that patient that like, here's what you say that they need to do. You hand them the patient handout afterwards on what they should do. They come back in 30, 60, 90 days and you ask them, did you do it? And they were like, half the time. Yeah, what did you expect? Okay. So that's kind of like, what to think about in the market today. Have I had deals go sideways south? Yes, absolutely. It's a matter of if, it's a matter of when, not a matter of if. Because I can have the most rigid due diligence, checklists in the world, and it's still not going to account for all the black swan events. My due diligence checklist did not account for COVID. I was invested in a medical, we were building a medical office. I was holding the note on it, and we were due to exit that June. We had the property under contract to exit, in March. Everything shut down. My business plan did not account for COVID. And then like a year later, we ended up having to fire sell the asset in order to get out from underneath it. So we went from I learn, you go back to the question, what did I learn from that? Is there anything that I needed to add to my portfolio for that? What I learned from that is that the operator that I was investing in, they had executed really well on construction and multifamily assets. And this was their first medical office. Did those skills 100% translate, right? I probably overlooked a couple of things, but for me, so I have that question in there, like, is this a new asset class for that operator? Do their skills translate? But also for me, I had to think about, is that a risk I'm willing to take on? Or am I just going to watch that operator to see how a couple of if they're in a new asset class, how are those deals going to go for about a year or so, and then invest? Let them work the kinks out, but just not with my dollar, right? I can tell 100 different horror stories, but pretty much all these horror stories have come down to either somebody not running their checklist appropriately, not doing the full vetting. They get starry-eyed by the numbers. Anybody can put numbers on a piece of paper, guys. And the pro forma that operators put out, I guarantee is 100% wrong. It's either going to be better or worse. No operator ever hits that pro forma exactly. But what you want to understand is, how did the operator adjust? When did they adjust to the business and the market challenges, and how did they adjust? Okay. How did they communicate during this time? Are they treating you as a partner and saying, okay, well, lease up on this property is a little bit behind this quarter. Here are the things that we're doing. Here's what the trends that we see going forward in the next 6, 9, 12 months. Are they painting it in rose-colored glasses? Are they really being like, we really see absorption being a challenge in this market for the next 12 months. Here's our forward-looking projection. We've reran them. This is what we see for lease up. But in 2025, once net absorption, has happened in this market, this is where we see rent increases going, right? Like, you want that type of transparency in that communication. And I think that's what a lot of investors, that should be the clue number one, that in an investment, if you're not getting communication and transparency, if it changes at all, like, you are a partner. You need to be communicating with the operator, going, what's going on? I used to get monthly updates, and now you're telling me I'm getting quarterly. Why? What's going on here? Right? It's a partnership. It's a two-way relationship.
It's a partnership. So let me ask you this about you. When it comes to your passive, so would you say 80% passive investment, 20% more active? Like, where are you in your own personal portfolio?
From a net worth perspective, I'm about 50-50. From a deal perspective, I'm about 90-10, mostly passive.
90 passive, 10% active.
But the 10% active are what make up a larger part of my net worth. Yes.
It's so interesting, because I would say that for us, we're also more active. And people laugh at me and say, maybe you're just a glutton for punishment. But every year I say I'm going to be more passive. And, we're passive through the stock market. So if you invest into the stock market, that is passive. And again, I want to be careful and aware that I'm making it sound like a brick, but it's just more for the ease of conversation. But we're passive in that regard. But then our active is what makes up a significant proportion. And I think for me, that's the draw to active for me, is I have the skills, I've learned the skills. And again, if you want to continue to grow, you have to create systems to make it easier for you to free up your time, so that you're not just getting another job. So again, we have the long term, we have the short term. So creating systems is important. But I was just curious to see where things fell for you. And Also, actually, one more question is, when it comes to your cash flow, your personal finance, is it coming more from your active or more from your passive or more from working?
Cash flow wise, majority of our cash flow actually comes from our passive investments.
I love
Oh,
that. I
it's,
love
yeah,
that.
I would say 60-40, 60%, you know, 60-65%. I need to run that number. Thank you. Is coming from passive investments. I mean, once I hit financial freedom, like, with my passive income number, I kind of, now I'm kind of shifting in because now I have more of my time back and freedom of time and choice. And so I'm taking on more of those, roles in the world where I get up and I love what I'm doing. Like, I love being here and talking to you guys and like trying to, educate, right? I do that, passiveinvesting.com. I do that at Ash Wealth. What I don't do is, I would agree. Like, I made a lot of money in the camper van rental business. That business we started ideally for my husband to leave his job, so he had something to do. Because I was like, you can't hang around the house all day. Like, you need to be doing something. So we created that business and we started to scale it. We started to implement systems, and then he was just like, you know what? I don't like it. I was like, okay, great. So what do you want to do with it? Because I'm not taking it over. Because if I did, it would be a distraction. And I think this is where you can't take on an active role just to take on an active role because you might make more money. You need to understand, is it actually feeding your goals, feeding your soul, that feeding that North Star? Where do you want to go? That vision for yourself. Because if you just take on an active role, be it in real estate, be it in your own business or whatever, and it doesn't fully align, that's when you hit burnout, right? Because you have that either cognitive dissonance, or you just have like, it's just gonna wear on you, right?
I cannot love that more. Like, I would literally, before our conversation earlier today, I was literally having that conversation with a friend of mine where I'm like, is this a distraction? Because especially if it's going to do with your time, which is one of your most limited resources, you have to be clear if this is a distraction or is this what you're meant to follow? And usually that would be, money is a good thing. And I want to normalize that conversation and more, meaning, is this what you're meant to do with your time? Is this what you're meant to do with your life in this season? Because that may change in the next season, depending on what your goal is. If you're just starting, you're like, I don't want to take more shifts, but I want a down payment for my next passive or active investment. Then exchanging time for money may be the way to go in that season for another purpose, because you know that it's planting seeds for the next season. So I cannot tell you how much I love that. So much. And I like that you also talked about being careful about not taking things from other people just because you are the next obvious delegation. They're delegated, putting it on your own time, right? And you could have taken that from your husband, which I'm sure you love your husband, you care deeply about him. And if he doesn't want you, like, I got the skills, but you went back to what your ideals were. You went back to what you want to do with your time, because otherwise you'd be taking yourself back to pre-2002 when your time was all taken with maybe not what you necessarily wanted it to be taken by.
Yeah. There's she's a clinical psychologist. I follow her. Her name is Dr. Terry Cole. She's amazing. She's spoken at a couple conferences that I have attended, and she has a book called Boundary Boss, which, for all the women out here, love that book. She has a workbook, which I've found even more powerful. But there's a question in there that she had, or two, that I actually like really, really, really love. Like, one, what are you tolerating? And like, it was really when I asked that question of myself, like, could I take on the camper van rental business? Yeah. Are we making good money at it? Yeah. But if I'm doing that, I'm tolerating, one, taking, reverse delegating, like taking something back and running it myself. But I'm also, was going to be tolerating not having the freedom to travel as much as I wanted to this summer. The past 4 summers, like we've, especially with COVID, like we weren't exactly like sad about that, but now it's like, the world's completely open to us. And we were like, now we didn't have to scramble to like get the van ready or the trailer ready or whatever. to handle the issues, people losing keys on the top of 13,000-foot peaks, and then we having to go bail them out. Like, we didn't have to handle with all those things. But so the question is, what are you tolerating? Okay. And then like identify those key areas of your life, like whatever your buckets are, whether it's like health, spirituality, adventure, horizontal income, vertical income, right? Like you can break it up, however you want. I would say keep to 6 to 9 categories max. And then the follow-up question is, and this requires nothing out of you, no action taken. But the next question is, if I were brave, how would I change this? And again, you don't have to show anybody the answers. You could just say like, well, if I were brave, like I would sell the camper van rental business. I would get it gone. And then what are the steps to like actually executing that? And it's kind of like a little bit of a different way of getting at fear setting in a way, because you don't actually have to take action on it. You're just like, if I were fully resourced and voicing my full self and holding a full boundary for myself, like this would be easy for me to change. So how can I do that?
I love it. I love it. So good. What I'm going to say is we're definitely going to have you back because there's so much conversation that I feel like, honestly, this is why before we got on, I said, Whitney, go check your calendar for 2025 September for our in-person event that's going to happen in San Diego. And, you're invited, which I hope she says yes to, because I just think and it is obvious that you like teaching, you're a teacher. And that is why when you add that on top of the skills you have, in addition, like the investment, it's just like a beautiful match. And so I want to say thank you for the work you do, through your individual business, through you working with passive income. If someone is trying to reach you, what is the best way for them to find you so that they can learn more from you and take advantage of some of the resources and opportunities you have with working with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So with passiveinvesting.com, you can reach me at passiveinvestingwithwhitney.com. It's a sub page on the website. And that will get you connected to all my passive investing masterclasses, boot camps, skills boot camps. We can also hop on a one-on-one call. If you're wanting one-on-one coaching, if you're, are ready to work in that capacity, you can reach out to me at ashwealth.com.
Thank you so very much. We're going to share that in the show notes as well. This has been incredible. If we did not have appointments after this, we'd keep going. But also, y'all just need to come back for another episode because it's going to be happening. So thank you so much. Enjoy your summer. And if you guys have loved this, number one is you may want to watch it all over again and get some more gold out of it because there was so much great content. Number two is make sure you order her book, Money for the Future. Is it Money for the Future, correct?
Money for Tomorrow.
Money for tomorrow and the future. No, money for tomorrow. We're going to make sure we have the link in the show notes for you guys. And of course, make sure you share this link with other women that can benefit from it. So thank you very much for coming to hang out with us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
All right. Bye, everybody.